Story number 1. This year, my family and I decided to spend a vacation at the sea. Although my wife's sister had been inviting us for a long time, work always took up all my time. However, the stars aligned, and my wife, daughter, and I were finally able to get away. The days flew by quickly. The work was stressful, but our spirits remained high. As the vacation approached, our excitement grew stronger and stronger. 2 weeks before the flight, we had already packed our bags, prepared documents, tickets, and everything else we needed for a fantastic vacation. The flight itself went smoothly, and upon arrival, my sister's husband greeted us warmly at the airport. He was considerably older than she was, a respectable man who had been successful in business despite not being very rich. Theirs was not a marriage of convenience, but rather a truly happy partnership that suited them both. We loaded our belongings into his spacious SUV and enjoyed the breathtaking mountain vistas during the nearly 2-hour drive to their home. To our surprise, their home turned out to be a wonderful mansion perched on the side of a mountain. Part of the mansion even went uphill, leaving us marveling at its size. The meeting was hot, both in terms of weather and reception. We had a lavish feast and drank an enormous amount of beverages. Our daughter and her cousin went to the beach, and the 4 of us relaxed on the outdoor patio, enjoying the spectacular views as it got darker. Eventually, we moved to the lawn, where a stone fire was waiting for us, surrounded by benches and a covered veranda to one side. It had been a long day, however, and the festivities gradually came to an end. The first to leave was my wife, exhausted from the journey. Then my sister's husband said goodbye to us, mindful of his work commitments for the next day. Only my sister and I remained, and we talked for a long time, reminiscing about the past. When the fire died down, we mutually agreed that it was time to end the conversation. My sister went into the house, while I opted to stay outside and settled into a chair, soaking up the sounds of nature. It turned out that our children, after spending time by the sea, had gone to a party. However, the girls are adults now, so let them decide for themselves how they want to relax. Later, my wife's sister went outside to talk on the phone. Listening to her voice, I started to doze off, but was awakened by a change in the tone of her conversation. It sounded like she was having a fairly frank conversation, probably with a man, assuming no one could overhear her. Gradually, I found myself intrigued by the dialogue, and judging from the change in her voice, she was as excited as I was. Suddenly, I caught a distinct note in her voice that left no room for doubt. Silently, I rose from my seat and approached her, gently placing my hand over hers. Her eyes flashed with apprehension for a moment, and then a spark of excitement. You can imagine what happened next. Story number 2. I never imagined that such an event could happen in my life. My affection for my wife, Emma, was deep and unwavering. We lived in contentment, were devoted to each other, and cherished our marriage for 8 years, always valuing and honoring our bond. However, one ordinary weekday, an inexplicable incident occurred. After a busy day at work, I stayed late at the office to complete an urgent project. I finally finished all my business and went outside close to midnight. The frost that had begun to set in caused a long delay in warming up the car. It was during this time that I suddenly saw a familiar silhouette. It was Nicole, a former classmate I hadn't seen in 11 years. Nicole stood, waiting for a cab, shivering in the penetrating wind. I couldn't bear to watch her suffering in the cold, and a feeling of compassion overwhelmed me. Approaching her, I offered to drive her home. Nicole gladly accepted my offer, and we set off on a road trip through her neighborhood. During the ride, we chatted animatedly, reminiscing about our high school years and the innocence of our first love. Time flies by so quickly. Surprisingly, just as we were nearing our destination, my old friend offered to stop by her place for a cup of hot coffee to warm up. At first, I refused her offer, but when the car stopped starting, I had no choice but to agree with her reasoning and take a break to warm up. As soon as I entered Nicole's cozy and warm apartment, she graciously served me hot soup, which helped me relax and completely lose track of time. Eventually, drawn into the conversation, I involuntarily fell asleep on the couch in Nicole's living room. I woke up in confusion around 8 in the morning, finding myself in my underwear, under the covers, but most surprisingly, in Nicole's bed. What could have happened? Was it a momentary lapse of judgment? A hallucination? Or perhaps an actual act of infidelity? I don't remember anything. I'm completely baffled. Nicole and I would never behave like this. Yet the evidence suggests otherwise. I'm naked in Nicole's bed. Maybe we lost control after all. I couldn't get an explanation from Nicole since she had already left for work, judging by her note. Gathering my thoughts, I hurriedly got dressed and left, leaving behind only a short note. On the way back, numerous questions ran through my mind. Was it worth it to resume a relationship with a former classmate? Isn't this a breach of trust against my spouse? What if she didn't believe me? When I got home, I told my wife everything, without withholding any details. She listened attentively, noticing my confusion. Eventually, my dear wife sympathetically understood the situation. She recognized that there had been no betrayal. It was just an accident and a chain of absurd events. Our family is still harmonious. Nevertheless, the incident has remained in my memory. How unexpected can the consequences of a simple, friendly conversation be? Story number 3.
This is a true account of an event that took place earlier this year in a picturesque town located in the southern region of Italy. My husband and I have been living together for 7 years, leading seemingly ordinary lives like everyone else. On our weekdays, he comes home from work and sits down at his computer to indulge in games while I cook dinner for him. One such evening, as I was cooking in the kitchen as usual, our windows overlooked a small square. It was then that I heard the delightful sounds of music wafting through the air. Intrigued, I looked out of the window and saw a tall man playing a guitar and singing. Mesmerized by the melody, I stood like that for about 5 minutes, completely immersed in what was happening. I couldn't understand what brought me out of reality for a moment, the music or the amazingly handsome stranger. But my reverie was abruptly interrupted by the hissing sound of the kettle and my husband's voice from the other room. I entered his room, but he didn't even notice my presence. He was absorbed in his games, seemingly oblivious to the world around him. It struck me that he could be a dull man himself at times. For some inexplicable reason, I wanted to go outside and meet this stranger. When I got home, I wandered around the house in my negligee, hoping that my husband would pay attention to me for once. I hurriedly put on my coat and hurried to the square, still in my negligee. Surprisingly, I immediately hit it off with the man. He quickly noticed my revealing outfit and kindly offered me a cup of coffee. It turned out that he lived in a neighboring house. As soon as we crossed the threshold of his apartment, we were overcome with an unusual sense of euphoria. My coat was shed in a matter of seconds. I hadn't realized that intimacy on the kitchen table could be more pleasurable than in bed. Everything seemed so perfect. From the bathroom to the washing machine, from the stove to the windowsill, we explored different places without even noticing that my phone was incessantly ringing. Interestingly, we never made it to the bedroom. However, upon discovering 15 missed calls from my husband, I immediately came to my senses. I tried to realize what had happened and what I had just done. My mind seemed to be clouded, but I didn't regret anything. I was in no hurry to get home. All night, I indulged in pure pleasure. In the morning, he made me a cup of coffee and we went to the square together. He played his guitar again and I went back home. My husband stood on the doorstep, not saying a word or getting into my business. Instead, he simply inquired why I hadn't picked up the phone. At that moment, I couldn't help but think that he really didn't care about me. It was then that I decided to tell him everything, down to the last detail. He listened carefully and then wondered if my actions were motivated by anger. Strangely enough, it took me only a few seconds to think about it. No, not out of spite, but rather out of my own volition and the fading passion in our relationship. However, I couldn't understand what made me do it at that very moment. We ended up getting divorced, but he wasn't the one who left me. I came to the conclusion that I was better off without him. I never met that man again, but I encountered numerous other men every day. And that life seemed more comfortable to me.
Story number 4. I have been in a relationship with my boyfriend for 2 years. He sincerely loves me and expresses his love not only in words, but also in actions. He constantly floods me with gifts and financially supports our entertainment, never putting any limits in front of me. In general, he is the epitome of an ideal man. However, periodically there are rumors that he is cheating on me. Even though he denies these rumors, I choose to believe in his fidelity. When he asks who believes such gossip, I confidently reply that it is not me. Lately, our relationship has become strained because of these rumors, and I sometimes feel hesitant to trust him. I understand that my doubts can be troubling, but they are not so significant that my partner shouts hurtful words at me, such as asking me to calm down and insinuating that he is sleeping with someone else. These words deeply upset me, and I found solace in turning to my best friend Henry. I called him and asked him to come over, and a short time later he showed up on my doorstep with a bag containing a bottle of our favorite wine. Henry reassured me, but unfortunately it didn't have the desired effect. Despite my attempts to calm down, my boyfriend's hurtful words continued to haunt me, making my eyes fill with tears again. I felt lost, not knowing how to distract myself from these painful thoughts. Even my friend's attempts to comfort me failed. Eventually, Henry excused himself and went into another room, where he turned on my computer. The sounds of soft music filled the air, instantly calming my troubled mind. I hurried over to him and asked him to turn up the volume. For the next half an hour, we listened to music and reminisced about our childhood, completely forgetting about my earlier worries. When the clock struck 12:30, the untouched bottle of wine served as a reminder that neither of us was thirsty. We had deep conversations, touching on a variety of topics. Suddenly, at 1 o'clock in the morning, my friend urgently called me to her place. Henry accompanied me, unaware of the events that would unfold that night. When we arrived, my friend was stunned by his presence, but allowed us to enter. Standing on the threshold, I inquired as to the reason for the late call. Amy insisted on talking to me alone, without my friend present. We moved to another room, where she confessed to me about her affair with my boyfriend. I remained calm and indifferent, as I didn't care anymore. After her confession, Henry and I decided to spend the night there, as I did not have the energy to go back home. Henry mentioned that he had brought alcohol with him, but I declined, and the two of them indulged in drinking. I went back to the living room and just sat there, my mind swarming with thoughts. Finally, Henry came up to me and said that he would share my bed with me that night. I silently agreed, and we made the bed and then went to bed. It was during this time that I got the idea to get back at my boyfriend, which eventually led to intimacy with my best friend. The next morning, I realized that our actions the previous night were due to emotional turmoil. I deeply regretted my actions. Story number 5. My friends arranged a surprise for my birthday and invited me to one of the famous restaurants in the city. I was thrilled with this news, as I had wanted to visit this place for a long time. Excited, I called my husband to inform him about our plans for the evening. We agreed that he would pick me up at 6 so that we could head to the restaurant. As I started to get ready around 4, the clock struck 5, and I got a text from my husband. Unfortunately, he couldn't drive me that day as he was busy at work, but he had a gift for me. Dejected, I was no longer in the mood for a date. Soon, my friend called me, and after hearing about what had happened, she tried to cheer me up, which seemed to work. After I finished packing, I hailed a cab and headed out to celebrate my birthday. The evening was great. We were having fun and socializing. Suddenly, a waiter came up to us with a bottle of wine from a neighboring table. We were pleasantly surprised and graciously accepted the gesture. At the neighboring table sat a group of not very young, seemingly successful men. Among them, I liked a tall blond man with blue eyes. The evening continued, filled with lively conversations and laughter. Suddenly, a waiter came to our table with a small cake with a note from a gentleman I knew. The note expressed admiration for my appearance and birthday greetings, as it was clear from our previous conversations that this was the day I was celebrating. It was a delightful gesture. Eager to refresh my makeup, I bowed out and headed for the restroom. As I exited, I noticed a gentleman from a nearby table standing nearby. He approached me and expressed a desire to get to know me better. We exchanged contact information and struck up a pleasant conversation. As the evening drew to a close, my friends were picked up by their husbands. Realizing it was time to leave, I tried calling my husband, but he didn't answer. I sent him a text message, but got no response. Michael, a gentleman I had met earlier, kindly offered me a ride. Thinking him to be a decent man, I accepted his offer. We got into his car and began a long conversation as we drove. We discovered that we had a lot in common. Michael suggested that we visit a nice place to enjoy a vacation. I agreed, realizing that I didn't feel truly welcome at home. We drove to the outskirts of town, not too far away. There we could admire the stunning sunrise. It was a wonderful idea on a warm, early summer morning. Getting out of the car, Michael gently slipped his jacket over my shoulders. It was the most romantic moment of my life. He came up behind me and gently embraced me. I smelled his perfume and felt a wave of pleasure. His embrace grew tighter and tighter, hinting at something more. Perhaps because of the heady atmosphere and the abundance of romance, I weakened and let him do what he wanted. Story number 6. Once again, before New Year's Eve, our company decided to hold a corporate meeting out of town in a spacious house. When I returned home, I shared this news with my wife, expecting that she might be jealous and forbid me to attend the event. Surprisingly, she reacted indifferently, advising me to go and rest. Curious, I asked if she would be jealous of my female colleagues, to which she assured me that she would not. She jokingly remarked that I was no longer attracted to younger women because of my age. This comment left me feeling disappointed and mildly offended by my wife's words. Despite her age, I believed that I still had some charm left in me. When we all gathered, we first discussed work matters. Then, as the alcohol flowed, one of our colleagues suggested we play a children's game. We were skeptical at first, but eventually we all agreed. The questions and tasks started out lighthearted and fun. Someone was instructed to sing like a bird while sitting on a chair, and someone confessed to intentionally staying late at lunch to work less. It was all a lot of fun. As the evening progressed and the alcohol continued to take effect, the game took on a more intense nature. When it was my turn, I chose a particularly intriguing question. I was asked to name the coworker who seemed most attractive. Without hesitation, I named Sarah from accounting. Her slim figure, long legs, and gorgeous brown hair made her the epitome of a dream girl. Everyone in our office seemed to stare at her as she walked by or headed to the cafeteria. Sarah sat across from me, and while it might not have seemed like it, I think she winked at me at that moment. Impressive, I muttered to myself. Maybe she's interested in me too? When it was her turn, she made her choice. My coworker Michael, who does the reporting, decided to make the evening even more exciting. He offered her 20 minutes alone with me in any available room. She agreed, and we left. I guess he wants to test my mettle. But that's okay, because I'll find a way to get back at him. We went upstairs, and as soon as I entered the room, Sarah closed the door behind her. This act didn't bother me. On the contrary, it increased my excitement. For a while, we chatted without being completely alone. Suddenly, she inquired if I had answered her question honestly. Naturally, I answered in the affirmative, because I had nothing to hide. No one at work knew about my marital status, and I was sure she wouldn't find out the truth. Besides, a little romance in the workplace could be a positive thing. I noticed a lingering blush on Sarah's face, probably due to the alcohol. She moved closer to me, and I realized that I liked what was going on between us. Taking matters into my own hands, I hugged her tightly. She didn't object, and I continued on. We never made it back downstairs to join the others. Story number 7. I was traveling for a few days on business. It was a significant deal worth a couple $1,000,000, and my boss had instructed me to travel to another city to discuss all the details with the client. Upon landing on the plane, the first thing I did was text my wife that I had arrived and was on my way to the hotel to check in. Since I didn't have any appointments scheduled for the first day, I decided to settle into my room and sleep for a few hours, given the long and arduous flight. Although I woke up at the ringing of my alarm clock, I had a hard time leaving my warm and welcoming bed. Gathering all my willpower, I pulled my laptop out of my briefcase and got to work. I had a report to finalize and a few documents to sign. Having finished all the business, I headed to the nearest cafe to grab a bite to eat. Having chosen a cozy table, I continued working at my laptop. Soon, a charming young waitress, looking about 20 years old, came up to me to take my order. I ordered seafood soup, carbonara pasta, and Caesar salad. I was informed that my order would be ready in about 15 minutes. At the appointed time, the same pleasant waitress brought a tray of food and set the plates on the table. During this time, I caught a glimpse of her name tag, which bore the name Ella. "You have a charming smile," I complimented her. "Smile as often as you can." The girl looked away embarrassed and replied with a quiet thank you. Encouraged, I inquired, "What are your plans for today after work?" Without hesitation, the girl timidly said she would be free at 9. With an hour to spare, I smiled and assured her, "I'll wait for you here." After our conversation, Ella hurried into the kitchen and then into the hall to attend to the other guests. After finishing the meal, I finished some things and decided to clear the table, taking the empty plates to the bar next to the kitchen. As I returned to the table and stowed my things in my briefcase, I noticed Ella appear in the hallway wearing a coat. Walking up to her, I wondered where we were going, but Ella didn't immediately suggest a place she knew and wanted to visit. Leaving the cafe, we headed towards the riverbank. Upon reaching the embankment, I was mesmerized by the breathtaking beauty of the river, which was splitting into two streams right where we were standing. "Such a stunning sight," I murmured quietly. Ella was in complete agreement with me, though she didn't even say it. After a short walk along the waterfront, I suggested we head to a nearby coffee shop for a coffee. Ella enthusiastically agreed, and within 15 minutes, we were holding steaming cups of coffee. Feeling a slight chill, she offered to walk to her house. I could not refuse such an offer. Soon we came to the entrance where Ella lived. She looked for the keys for a long time. When she found them, we went up to the 7th floor of the 9-story building and entered the apartment. In the kitchen, Ella poured wine into our glasses. We slowly drank the wine and talked for a long time, having drunk a fair amount. We moved to the living room and settled down on the sofa. I noticed my companion's hand on my knee, which gradually went higher and higher until it reached its goal. Alcohol clouded my judgment, and I was no longer fully aware of my actions. Everything I desired was within reach, and I indulged in it. The feeling was surreal, almost forbidden, but undeniably sweet. When it all happened, I tasted my own triumph. Story number 8. During my vacation to Bali, I decided to go without my husband, but with my girlfriends. We decided to relax and enjoy each other's company. Being a young woman, I was eager to have a good time and relax. We spent our days either at the beach, bars, restaurants, or clubs. The island was full of charming guys, and I found myself attracted to one of them. He was a strong, handsome man, a few years older than me. I couldn't resist his charm. One night, when I was having dinner at a hotel restaurant with my girlfriends, I received a note from a man sitting at a neighboring table. He asked if I would agree to take a walk with him on the beach near the hotel in half an hour. Intrigued by his invitation and feeling a connection, I agreed. I informed my friends of my plans and hurried to meet him. When I arrived at the beach, he greeted me warmly and apologized for not extending the invitation in person. His respectful demeanor took me by surprise, but I was pleasantly intrigued. Without much hesitation, we went for a leisurely stroll along the beach. As we walked, we made small talk about work, hobbies, and general vacation experiences. When we reached the hotel, he kindly offered to escort me to my room. Without too much hesitation, I accepted his offer, as I had already planned that we would have a glass of wine and continue our conversation. So everything went according to plan. As we sat and talked, the wine in the bottle gradually became less and less. At some point, I felt the need to touch up my makeup. Walking over to the dressing table, I noticed a poof next to it. I settled down on it, resting my knees on it, and leaned toward the mirror to make sure my makeup was flawless. The guy was sitting on the couch right behind me. Since I was wearing a short mini dress, I had a gorgeous view in front of him. I looked in my reflection and saw his gaze staring right under my dress. After standing like that for a while, he came up behind me, leaned in so that his lips were near my ear, and his body pressed against mine. He whispered softly, "Shall we continue on the bed?" Overwhelmed with a sense of triumph, I replied, "Why there when we can indulge right here and right now?" Without delay, my dress was quickly pulled up to my waist, and what you know all too well followed. I don't regret cheating on my husband. I just couldn't resist this grown man. Story number 9. My wife and I recently moved to a new residence and decided to throw a housewarming party for our friends and family. We ordered food and drinks, and the party was well attended. We had fun, listened to music, and socialized. My spouse has a friend from her past that I admired back in my high school days. Unfortunately, I was not her favorite as she rejected my advances early on. Over time, I realized that my feelings had faded. However, whenever my spouse invited her to visit or our paths crossed, this friend would show me extra attention. When I eventually told my wife about it, she thought it was my imagination. Later that evening, she asked permission to stay the night. When the evening was over and the guests began to leave, my wife had a headache and I advised her to rest, assuring her that I would clean the kitchen myself. After taking a sleeping pill, she fell asleep. I was left alone, assisted by the same friend. While she washed the dishes, I cleared the table and put everything in its place. Sarah, a friend of my wife's, asked how I felt about starting a relationship with her. I replied that she was a fool for asking such questions without realizing the obvious. "I have a wife, but you were in love with me before. Could anything have changed?" she asked. "Of course," I replied. After all, it had been so many years. How could she not realize that I couldn't possibly like her anymore? After finishing cleaning up in the kitchen, we dispersed to our rooms. Sarah asked me to walk her to the bathroom, and I agreed, then went back to the kitchen to turn off the light. As I walked down the hallway, I noticed the bathroom door was ajar, and the light was on. Looking inside, I saw that Sarah wasn't dressed. I looked away and advised her to close the door, but she reached for me. Taking my hands in hers, she began to reassure me. "There's nothing wrong with cheating," Sarah assured me. I resisted at first, but the alcohol and desire overcame me. I couldn't resist. We then proceeded to the room designated for her rest. Turning out the lights, it was quiet and peaceful. My high school dream had come true, even though I didn't want it myself. But I guess those feelings that were there came back, and I just wanted to taste the forbidden fruit. But what about my wife? I won't be able to hide the affair from her for much longer. Story number 10. My name is Victoria. I am 24 years old. I have been married for over 6 years. My husband, John, runs his own business, and unfortunately, he is not home all day. I have been used to this routine since the second year of our marriage. Despite my girlfriend's occasional hints that John may be spending time with someone else rather than working, I have always trusted him completely. Our relationship has been built on loyalty and devotion. However, there was one incident that shook my confidence in our marriage. One evening on my way home, I decided to take a leisurely walk in the park because of the nice weather. The streets were crowded. When I got home, I noticed a pair of unfamiliar shoes in the hallway. Curious, I called out to my husband, "Hi, honey, how was your day?" He greeted me affectionately with a gentle kiss on my neck. I inquired about our unexpected guest, not knowing what to expect. It turned out to be an old friend who had recently gone through a divorce and wanted to be alone. He's staying with us for a week. "I hope you don't mind, my love," John said, his smile carrying a tinge of schadenfreude. I nodded in agreement and headed into the bedroom to change. As I entered the kitchen, I saw him. Michael, my ex-boyfriend, was sitting in the chair across from my husband, sipping tea. He greeted me with a wry smile, and John started to introduce us, even though it wasn't necessary. I silently hoped my husband wouldn't find out he was my ex-boyfriend. The fact that Michael was an old friend made me even more anxious. I didn't pay attention to why he was at our table and smirking at me. All my attention was focused solely on my husband. Uncertainty filled my mind. I dozed off, and my last thought was that I would spend the next day in his company. My shift at work was over, as if it was bad luck. I woke up in a bad mood, and for that, ready to vent my frustration. I went to the kitchen for coffee and found Michael watching TV. As it happened, the only TVs were in the bedroom and kitchen. His gaze, kind words, and smile alarmed me. I couldn't bring myself to even look at him, let alone engage in conversation. "Victoria, you've been looking pale and irritable since this morning. Your husband doesn't comfort you at night, does he? Doesn't it hurt you to go to him?" Michael gave a fake chuckle. "I feel pale and angry about having you in my house. Let me be clear, I want nothing to do with you. I am deeply in love with my husband." With a note of arrogance, I replied, "Oh, of course. Remember how good you were with me? You meant everything to me. Don't you want to relive it all over again and get back what we had?" asked Michael. "Well, I don't." "You're not getting anything, so stop daydreaming," I said, smirking at my uninvited guest. "We'll see," he muttered and pulled me to him with force. I resisted and kicked, determined not to let Mike do anything to me. However, our strength was unequal. He grabbed me and dragged me into the bedroom. I didn't have the strength to resist anymore. Everything happened like a blur. Perhaps amidst the hatred he was showing, I felt something for him. I was in a desperate position, having committed many transgressions. How can I face my husband now? I really don't want him to find out about the cheating and that his best friend is my ex-boyfriend. I love my husband deeply, and this moment of weakness could destroy our marriage. Story number 14. She ventured into marriage in her early 20s. Fortunately, her husband adored her, and they were very happy together. It was impossible to ignore her stunning beauty. She had perfect posture, a slim waist, and lush breasts. She was the epitome of the American dream. Her long, thick, wispy brown hair added to her appeal. Whenever her husband's friends and acquaintances met her, they couldn't help but drool and envy that he was very lucky to have her. It is worth noting that her husband preferred beautiful women, so Mila always tried to maintain her appearance and remain desirable for him. She deeply loved her husband and kept him faithful. For 5 years, everything went smoothly. On Saturdays, the beloved went to the bachelor party, and Mila enjoyed the company of her close friends. They arranged fancy dinners, danced in clubs, and had a great time. Then Mila would call her husband. He would come to pick her up from the party, and they were both happy. Another Saturday came, and, as usual, her husband went out with his friends. This time, Mila's friends invited her to a party at a nightclub. Dressed in a stunning outfit, I tried to look my best by wearing a short and tight dress. Admiring myself in the mirror, I couldn't help but feel confident and satisfied with my appearance. Then I decided to call a cab and go to the club. The atmosphere was lively and noisy, so it was hard for me to find my friends right away. They were talking and laughing animatedly. Before I could sit down with my group, someone suddenly grabbed my arm and dragged me to the dance floor. A cocky man caught my attention. He had a mesmerizing gaze, radiating the power of a predator. He politely apologized and asked if I would join him for a dance. Despite a slight feeling of resentment, I couldn't resist his charm and agreed to dance with him. His name was Victor, and he was undeniably handsome. After the dance, we parted, but I felt that our acquaintance did not end there. Victor was assertive and determined. I returned to the table and ordered a drink, joining in the toasts and enjoying the company of my friends. Soon the music started again, and I couldn't resist the urge to show off my impressive dance moves. Mila, as always, received compliments for her skill on the dance floor. Victor surprised Mila by dancing behind her, putting his hands on her waist and lower. Mila didn't resist, succumbing to the influence of the alcohol. Then he took her hand as before, and they walked out of the club together. They found themselves in a park surrounded by large bushes. Mila couldn't help but wonder how she had ended up there. That night was the beginning of cheating on her husband. Since then, every weekend at the club, she would let herself go and find a new guy to have fun with. Mila came to realize that life is short, and it is important to enjoy it to the fullest. She really enjoyed doing it in the bushes under the tree. Story number 13. One day I had an argument with my wife Ruth. The reason for our disagreement was trivial, but given the frequency of such incidents over the past week, it was not surprising that she decided to stay with her mother for a few days. Feeling frustrated, I decided to drown my sorrows in alcohol. After drinking whiskey, I felt drowsy and was overcome with the urge to sleep. But after realizing that I had a work project to complete, I forced myself out of bed to retrieve my backpack from the hallway. Despite the clouding of my mind, I remembered that I had left all the necessary papers in the office. Realizing the importance of the project, I decided to postpone it until the next day. It was clear that traveling in my current state was out of the question. As a boss, I could not risk my employees finding out about my irresponsible behavior. After much deliberation, I contacted my secretary to have her bring the documents to my home. Jessica arrived promptly, offering her assistance with the project. "Mr. Robinson, is everything okay? Can I help you with the project we've already discussed?" "I'm here to support you," she said as she entered my apartment. I replied, "Jessica, why the formality? You're in my home. Call me by my first name." If I had known how this was going to end, I wouldn't have called her. When our work was done, I suggested we celebrate. Jessica agreed. As we drank, I couldn't help but notice how alluring Jessica's secretary was. She seemed to mesmerize me with her gaze and beckon me with her figure. In our 11 years of friendship, I had never realized how feminine and attractive she was. After the wine, she was hungry and asked me to make something to eat. I excused myself for a few minutes to get something to eat from the kitchen. When I returned, she was nowhere to be found. I called out to her, but got no response. I sat down on the couch and dozed off. When I woke up, I felt someone sitting on my lap and stroking my hair. It was her. I was very surprised by her sudden actions. Jessica kissed me, and I responded by gently wrapping my arms around her waist. After a short thought, we proceeded to intimacy. That's how I betrayed my wife with a coworker. I still remember her warm breath and tender lips. I am overwhelmed with guilt, fear, and regret for my impulsive act. My wife still knows nothing. I hope it will continue to be so. Story number 12. Hi everyone. I want to share an interesting story from my life. The phone rang in the kitchen, but I was on the balcony and missed the call. Then there was another call, and I answered it. And I recognized the voice in the receiver. It was my friend Angela. Angela is 22 years old. She looks great and has a good figure." Every time she called, I knew she wanted to suggest something new, like a birthday party or a get-together with friends. This time she chose the latter. "Come, Deborah, you still have time to get ready for tonight. It won't be the same without you," she said. Whenever Angela and I celebrated something, we always did it together. Since tomorrow was a day off, I decided to go. I took a quick shower, tried on my favorite outfit in front of the mirror, and chose a dress that emphasized my figure. After putting on my high-heeled shoes and taking my purse, I closed the door and went for a walk. I arrived at Angela's house, a large house where she was eagerly waiting for me. When we entered the house, the large oblong table was already set, and we could only anticipate the arrival of the guests. Patrick and Jerry were the first to arrive, followed by my friends and a few other acquaintances. We gathered around the table, enjoying the wine and bantering with each other, creating a lively party atmosphere. After a few hours of such pleasantries, I felt positive energy fill me. Then the dancing began. I danced with all the guys I knew who asked me to join them, and each of them radiated cheerfulness and avoided any dull moments. This brought me great joy. At one point, Patrick asked me to dance. As we danced, I felt his hands gradually moving lower and lower, but I kept silent. When the dance was over, he gently suggested a walk and took me outside. I stepped out into the courtyard, and the cool, fresh air felt refreshing against my skin, for it was already dark. We walked down the street and came upon an abandoned old house. Despite my doubts, I agreed to go there. Inside, we found a table, chairs, and a bed. As we sat down, I felt his warm breath on my skin. He took my hand and placed it on his leg, and above, I didn't mind. Patrick started sharing personal stories, telling me about his longtime admiration for me and how hard it was for him to admit his feelings to me. My heart melted, and we laid down on the dusty old couch. And things happened. We eventually got into a relationship, and a year later he proposed to me. But the most interesting thing about this story is his father. He's been on my ass since the wedding. I don't know what to do about it. Story number 11. There comes a long-awaited moment in every student's life when the monotonous routine of studying finally comes to an end. The last academic semester means the end of attending classes, and instead, it's time to go for an internship and get your diploma. I, like many others, was no exception. After celebrating the end of the last session, I eagerly headed to my internship site. It is worth noting that by the age of 23, I had already gained valuable experience in the industry I was studying. Having a striking appearance, a tall brunette with a beautiful figure, blue eyes, and luxurious long hair, I had knowledge and experience in my field. At work, I was willingly given responsibilities because of my competence. The internship site was not far from my home, so I often stayed late after work, trying to get as much done as possible in a day. My supervisor, who also stayed late, was not old, but quite an attractive and pleasant man. His dedication to his work was evident in his willingness to work late. He was married and didn't seem to be bothered by the presence of other women. When I met his wife, I realized why. She was a classic, unpretentious woman, and it became clear to me why the chief's office was often frequented by women in the evenings. If I had a wife like his, I'd start getting naughty too. That evening, working late, I found an error in one of the reports and decided to immediately report it to the boss. As I approached his office, a woman was coming out, counting money. I knocked and entered. "May I?" I asked. "Sure, Eliana. Come on in," the chief replied as he relaxed and smoked at his desk. I informed him of the error in the report, sitting down across from him. He listened intently, his gaze fixed. One of his hands was under his desk, in the other, he held a cigarette. I mentioned my desire to excel during my internship, hoping to get a permanent position with the firm. The chief's reaction was peculiar. He hinted that success had to be earned. I realized what he was getting at. The situation was getting rather delicate. We're alone in the office. He's a mature, handsome man. I'm a young and hopeful girl. Rising from my seat and pushing aside a stack of papers and reports, I sat down on the edge of my desk. The boss was great, quickly stood up and walked over to me. Thus began our office romance. While I was picking up the scattered documents, the boss was smoking a cigarette and silently watching what was happening. When I was about to leave, he asked, "Come see me tomorrow. I'd like to discuss the possibility of your employment here, as you show great promise." "Sure," I replied with a smile. I bid him goodbye with a kiss and walked out of the office. My legs trembled slightly at the thought of becoming an employee of the company. I decided that I would stay late the next night to scrutinize some reports with my boss. Perhaps then I could become his deputy.